Some names are remembered for their heroic acts, while others are remembered for the horror they left behind. And a man named Jeffrey Dahmer is one of them. He seemed like a normal man, quiet, even shy. But behind closed doors, he was hiding a nightmare that shocked the whole world. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and rapist who walked among us without anyone knowing. What made him do the terrible things he did? And how could a monster hide in plain sight for so long? Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in United States. He was the first son of Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a chemistry student who would later become a research chemist, and Joyce Annette Dahmer, a teletype machine instructor. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, had German and Welsh roots, while his mother, Joyce, was of Norwegian and Irish descent. From the very beginning, Jeffrey's childhood was marked by uncertainty. Some accounts suggest he was deprived of attention as an infant, while others claim he was doted upon by his parents. Still, Joyce's tense behavior and her constant need for attention created a turbulent home environment. As Jeffrey entered first grade, his father Lionel's demanding studies kept him away from home, and Joyce, plagued by her own issues, often spent long hours in bed, seeking comfort in her medications. The tension in the household was palpable, and Jeffrey later recalled feeling unsure about the stability of his family. He witnessed numerous arguments between his parents, which left an imprint on his young mind. Once an energetic and happy child, Jeffrey became noticeably subdued after undergoing double hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday. In school, he was seen as quiet and timid, with only a few friends. His teachers noted early signs of abandonment, likely a result of his father's absence and his mother's worsening health, particularly after the birth of his younger brother David in December 1966. The family had moved to Doylestown, Ohio that same year, marking yet another shift in Jeffrey's young life. From an early age, Dahmer exhibited a strange fascination with dead animals. This interest may have ignited when he saw his father removing animal bones from beneath their home at just 4 years old. His father noted that Jeffrey was oddly thrilled by the sound of the bones, which led him to collect them, calling them his fiddlesticks. He often searched for more bones around their home and explored the bodies of live animals to learn about their skeletons. In May 1968, the family moved again, this time to Bath Township, Ohio. Here, in a home surrounded by woods, Jeffrey found a small hut where he began collecting insects and the skeletons of small animals like chipmunks and squirrels. Some of these remains were preserved in jars of formaldehyde, stored within his makeshift laboratory. 2 years later, during a family dinner, Jeffrey posed a curious question to his father about what would happen if chicken bones were bleached. Lionel, pleased by what he saw as a sign of scientific curiosity, demonstrated the process. Jeffrey took this knowledge and began to apply it to his bone collection, dissecting dead animals, including roadkill, and burying them beside the hut, marking their graves with makeshift crosses. A friend later recounted that Jeffrey expressed a desire to understand how animals fit together. This curiosity took a chilling turn in 1975 when he decapitated a dog's carcass, nailing the body to a tree and displaying the skull on a stick in the woods behind his house. He later invited a friend to see this gruesome display, claiming it was a chance discovery. As Jeffrey explored his dark interests, his mother, Joyce, began to retreat further into her own world, increasing her use of medications. This emotional distance only added to the chaos in Jeffrey's life, setting the stage for the chilling path he would ultimately follow. In the shadows of his childhood, the signs of a troubled mind were beginning to take shape, foreshadowing the horrors that would later unfold. Jeffrey Dahmer's early years were a mix of neglect, curiosity, and darkness, a combination that would lead him down a very sinister road. From his very first year at Revere High School, Jeffrey Dahmer was seen as an outcast. By the age of 14, he had already started drinking beer and hard alcohol during the day, often hiding his liquor inside the jacket he wore to school. When a classmate questioned him about drinking scotch in a morning history class, Dahmer shrugged it off, claiming the alcohol was his medicine. Despite his struggles, Dahmer was regarded by school staff as polite and intelligent, though he earned only average grades. He was a competitive tennis player and even played briefly in the high school band. But as he entered puberty, Dahmer discovered he was gay, a truth he kept hidden from his parents. In his early teens, he had a brief relationship with another boy, though they never engaged in sexual intercourse. During this time, Dahmer began to develop disturbing fantasies about domination and control over a completely submissive male partner. By his mid-teens, these fantasies evolved, intertwining with his thoughts of dissection. At around 16, he fixated on a particular male jogger he found attractive, conceiving a chilling fantasy of rendering him unconscious to exploit his body. On one occasion, Dahmer even hid in the bushes with a baseball bat, waiting for the jogger to pass by. However, the man never appeared that day, marking Dahmer's first attempt to assert control over another individual. By 1977, Dahmer's academic performance began to decline. His parents, concerned about his future, hired a private tutor, but it yielded limited results. That same year, in a desperate attempt to save their crumbling marriage, Lionel and Joyce attended counseling sessions. However, their arguments continued, and when Lionel discovered Joyce had an affair in September 1977, the couple decided to divorce. In May 1978, Dahmer graduated from high school. Just weeks before graduation, a teacher caught him sitting near the school parking lot, drinking several cans of beer. When confronted, Dahmer revealed that he was dealing with a lot of problems at home, and mentioned that the school guidance counselor was aware of his situation. That spring, his mother Joyce, contrary to a court order, moved out with Dahmer's younger brother David to live with relatives in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, without informing Lionel. Dahmer had just turned 18 and remained in the family home, witnessing the final unraveling of his parents' marriage. Their divorce was finalized on July 24, 1978, with Joyce awarded custody of David and alimony payments. In these years filled with chaos and emotional turmoil, the foundation of Jeffrey Dahmer's dark future was being laid, marking the beginning of a disturbing transformation. Just 3 weeks after graduating high school in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. On June 18th, he picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks. Dahmer lured Hicks to his home under the pretense of sharing a few beers, promising a good time as he had the house to himself. Hicks, on his way to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park, accepted the invitation. Dahmer later described how the sight of the bare-chested Hicks ignited his sexual feelings, but when Hicks began talking about girls, Dahmer realized any advances he made would be rejected. After several hours of drinking and listening to music, Hicks expressed his desire to leave, but Dahmer didn't want him to go. In a sudden act of violence, he bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell, striking him twice from behind as he sat in a chair. When Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him with the dumbbell bar and then stripped him of his clothes. In a chilling act, Dahmer explored Hicks's body and masturbated while standing over the corpse before dragging it to the basement. The following day, Dahmer dissected Hicks's body in his basement, burying the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Weeks later, he unearthed the remains, pared the flesh from the bones, and dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing it down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woods behind his home, disposing of Hick's necklace and the knife used for dismemberment by throwing them into the Cuyahoga River. 6 weeks after this horrific act, Dahmer's father returned home to find him living alone. In January 1979, pushed by his father, Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army. He completed basic training in Alabama and began training as a medical specialist in Texas, but his alcohol problems led to reprimands and punishment. On July 13, 1979, he was deployed to Baumholder, West Germany, serving as a combat medic. Initially, he was considered an average soldier, but his performance deteriorated due to his drinking, and by March 1981 he was deemed unfit for military service and was honorably discharged. Returning home, Dahmer felt he could not face his father and instead moved to Miami Beach, Florida, where he found work at a delicatessen. However, he soon spent all his earnings on alcohol and was evicted from his motel. After a few months, he contacted his father and returned to Ohio in September. Dahmer lived with his father and new stepmother for a brief time, insisting on taking on many chores while looking for work. Despite his efforts, he continued to drink heavily and was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct shortly after his return. His father tried unsuccessfully to help him quit drinking. In December 1981, Dahmer was sent to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, in hopes that her influence would encourage him to live a more responsible life. Initially, living with his grandmother seemed to bring some stability. He found a job as a phlebotomist at the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center, but after 10 months he was laid off and remained unemployed for 2 years, relying on his grandmother for support. One day, while reading in a public library, Dahmer was propositioned by another man, which reignited his dark fantasies of control and dominance. He started frequenting gay bars and bathhouses, immersing himself in a world where he could act on his desires. In June 1986, he began administering sleeping pills to his partners, attempting to control them during sexual encounters. After several instances, the bathhouses revoked his membership, leading him to use hotel rooms for his activities. Dahmer's obsession deepened, and he even considered stealing a corpse from a grave. As Dahmer's life spiraled out of control, the seeds of his darkest desires were being sown, setting the stage for the horrific acts he would commit in the years to come. On November 20, 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer was living with his grandmother when he met 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi at a bar. Persuading Tuomi to return with him to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, Dahmer claimed he only wanted to drug him and explore his body. However, the next morning Dahmer awoke to a horrifying sight. Tuomi lay dead beneath him, his chest bruised and blood seeping from his mouth. Dahmer's fists and forearm were also bruised, yet he professed to have no memory of the murder, expressing disbelief at what had occurred. In a panic, Dahmer purchased a large suitcase to transport Tuomi's body back to his grandmother's home. A week later, he dismembered the corpse, severing the head, arms, and legs, and filleting the bones from the body. He placed the flesh in plastic garbage bags, wrapped the bones in a sheet, and pounded them into splinters with a sledgehammer. The dismemberment took him about 2 hours, with most of Tuomi's remains disposed of in the trash, leaving only the head behind. For 2 weeks, Dahmer kept Tuomi's head wrapped in a blanket. When he finally boiled it in a mixture of soy-lax and bleach in an attempt to preserve the skull for personal use, it became too brittle, leading him to pulverize and dispose of it. Dahmer later described Tuomi's murder as a pivotal incident that unleashed his dark compulsions. He began actively seeking victims, primarily from gay bars, luring them to his grandmother's home. Once there, he would drug his victims with substances like triazolam or temazepam before engaging in sexual acts. Once they were unconscious, he would strangle them to death. Just 2 months after Tuomi's killing, Dahmer encountered 14-year-old James Doxtator, a Native American prostitute. Luring him with the promise of $50 for nude photos, Dahmer engaged in sexual activity before drugging and strangling Doxtator on the cellar floor. He left the body there for a week before dismembering it in a manner similar to Tuomi. All remains except the skull were discarded, while the skull was boiled and cleansed in bleach before Dahmer ultimately pulverized it 2 weeks later. This dark series of events marked the beginning of Dahmer's horrific journey into a life of crime, with each act becoming increasingly disturbing. Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. Most of his murders happened in his apartment on North 25th Street, where he killed 12 of his victims. 3 others were killed and dismembered at his grandmother's house in West Allis. His first 2 victims were murdered at his parents' home in Ohio and at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. 14 of Dahmer's victims came from different ethnic backgrounds, with 9 being black. Dahmer claimed that the race of his victims did not matter to him. He was attracted to their body shapes. This was backed up by a study that showed his victims shared similar physical features, suggesting he liked a specific type of body. Most of Dahmer's victims were drugged with sedatives before he strangled them. His first victim was killed by hitting and strangling, and his second victim was beaten to death. In 1990, another victim named Ernest Miller died from shock and blood loss after Dahmer cut his neck. In a very disturbing method, 4 of Dahmer's victims in 1991 had holes drilled in their skulls. He injected hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains, trying to make them submissive. Sadly, this method ended up killing them all. Dahmer's arrest occurred on July 22, 1991. He was apprehended after one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and flagged down 2 police officers. Edwards led the officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they discovered disturbing evidence including photographs of dismembered bodies and human remains. Dahmer's trial began on January 30th, 1992. He was charged with 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin. During the trial, he admitted to the killings and expressed remorse, stating that he was driven by an uncontrollable urge. His defense team argued that he was legally insane, while the prosecution maintained that he was fully aware of his actions. On February 15, 1992, Dahmer was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, totaling 957 years. He was murdered on November 28, 1994, while serving his sentence at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His death occurred in the gymnasium area of the prison, where he was assigned to work along with 2 other inmates, including Christopher Scarver. Scarver attacked Dahmer and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, using a metal bar from the gym equipment. Dahmer was severely beaten and later found unconscious in the bathroom. He suffered multiple injuries, including fatal wounds to the head. Dahmer was taken to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The attack was reportedly motivated by Scarver's feelings about Dahmer's notoriety and the way Dahmer would often play with body parts during meals, which disturbed other inmates. Scarver later claimed that he had a vision or a voice that told him, "Kill Jeffrey." Jeffrey Dahmer's case remains one of the most notorious in American criminal history, raising discussions about mental health, the criminal justice system, and societal issues surrounding his victims. So this was the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.